CATT, Center for Assistive Technology Training Northwest.
CATT Cast Episode 3, 2025 APH Annual Meeting featuring Dr. Craig Meador and Paul Schroeder. Welcome to the CATT Cast, where we highlight key takeaways and insights from conferences and events that are hosted by our CATT community partners. Whether you made it to the conference or hope to attend next year, we want to celebrate the accomplishments of our partners and spark discussion around education and technology for blind and low vision accessibility. We hope that this podcast may help you connect with a community of practice and, of course, get excited about tech. Enjoy!
Hey, friends! Welcome to the CATT Cast, the podcast where we celebrate connection, community, and all things tech in the world of blindness and low vision education. I'm your host, Techie TVI Heather from CATT Northwest, and I'm so glad you're here. In today's episode, we're spotlighting two standout speakers from the American Printing House for the Blind annual meeting in Louisville. For 167 years, this annual gathering has brought together leaders in the field of visual impairment. This year, more than 400 professionals came together to explore the latest APH products and initiatives designed to support students and adults who are both blind or have low vision. Like many of you, I wasn't able to attend in person this year, which makes me especially excited to hear directly from the keynote speakers who are leading change and advocacy in our field. Today, we're joined by Dr. Craig Meador, President of APH, and Paul Schroeder, Vice President of Government and Community Affairs at APH. Dr. Meador is a former teacher of the visually impaired and previously served as Director of Outreach at the Washington State School for the Blind, WSSB, before becoming President of APH. Now, this is especially meaningful for us at CATT Northwest, as our program is part of a collaboration between APH, the Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind, and WSSB. So it's truly exciting to have you both here. Dr. Meador.
Hi, Heather. Thanks for having us today. It's always good to talk to TVIs out there. I think that's the thing I miss the most. I've been at APH now. This is going on my 12th year. That day-to-day contact with people from the field and, more importantly, the students we serve. Those are the things I miss the most. So it's always good to be able to have a connection to the field and say a few words.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't able to attend this year's meeting in person, but I did have the opportunity to watch your keynote on YouTube. And what I noticed was that the theme of this year's conference was Thrive. And in your keynote, you challenged the audience, like myself, TVIs in the field, to think beyond simply surviving in their roles to truly thriving. So when you talk about thriving, can you help explain a little bit more of what that means to you personally, both in your professional work as well as in your life outside of it?
Sure. Yeah, that was interesting. So I don't pick the topics for annual meeting. We have a wonderful communications team. And that's the one of all years. That's the topic they threw at us this year, saying it's going to be about Thrive. We came through some rough times on a governmental level, but last year was a rough year. It was. And I'm happy to say that we've come through that just fine and have learned to adjust to all that. But to go into annual meeting this year is just like, hey, let's talk about thriving. And of course, that's such a positive word. It has such connotations of you are just rolling, everything's clicking, sun is shining, jobs going great, plenty of dollars in the bank, the car's running fine. That's the myth of Thrive that we've all been sold for so long. And so
Sure.
I wrestled with that one quite a bit, and I wrote several different things. I love word study. Yeah, I mean, I'm very amateurish at it, but when I am handed a word, I like to go into word origins. And
Sure.
one of the origins of the word thrive actually was an Old Norse term. It was thrifa.
Mm.
And what that meant was to go out and grab hold of something when you absolutely are out of control.
Sure.
So it wasn't the idea of thrive, at least in Old Norse days, wasn't this idea of, everything is coming up roses. It is like you got the Old Norse version was you got 2 feet in the crapper and all the world is collapsing around you. And
Sure.
you can either lay down in it or you can get up and grab a hold of that thing you can't control and master it. And that's a powerful visual imagery of what it means to thrive. And one author I was reading, he put it this way. He said, to thrive is to throw yourself out of the airplane. Just throw yourself out of the airplane. And that's not saying you've got a parachute. It's basically that idea of you have one choice here, and that is to grab the thing that is hard to do and put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. And I think we've done that a lot this year. I think the circumstances that we've been faced with, and we've seen this all across the country, from large districts to small rural districts. Of course, in 50 years, we've always been dealing with a shortage of personnel. We've been dealing with lack of access for our students. We've been dealing with real equity issues. And it's, I think, so much the role of the TVI is, yes, you're a teacher and an educator, but equally as important as you are the advocate. And you spend as much time fighting for your kids as you do instructing your kids.
We're in the field, and we're also the biggest advocates, which reminded me of something that you said in your keynote, was that when you explore the different definitions of what thrive meant, you gave an example of a flower. What does that look like to thrive? And this also reminded me of something I read once in the staff room of one of my student schools. And it said, if a flower isn't blooming, you don't change the flower, but you change the environment in which it grows. So in your view, how much of our role as educators and advocating and creating environments where students and colleagues can truly thrive, how important is that?
Wow. The answer is yes. I know that really doesn't answer the question, but I think that environment is so critical, because if the environment isn't right, if it's not a supportive environment, or if you don't have all the systems in place that you need, then it's going to be hard for students to thrive.
Sure.
And also, if you want to take that to the next level, because I've seen some amazing TBIs and some ridiculously difficult educational systems. And these TBIs have just amazing skills, but could never, ever achieve their potential as an educator because of all the battles they were fighting. So they spent more time fighting administration, and that was sucking so much energy out of them that they weren't growing professionally or being able to showcase their skills in the way that should have been available to them. And so that's also true for educators too.
Do you have a personal experience in your own journey when you were a TVI, or
Oh
even
my God.
as CEO or president, that reshaped your understanding of what it looked like to thrive through challenges?
Oh my, there's so many. So my first contracted teaching job was in 1988, way before the day of the age of the computer and the cell phone. And I was in Central Oregon, driving on average 600 miles a week to meet the needs of my students. I had 4 Braille students, and one
Wow.
was an advanced math student. So I was doing all that prep work on a Perkins Brailler. So that's my walking uphill both ways to school in a
Wow.
snowstorm kind of thing. I had one young lady who was in a rural district in Oregon. And in addition to vision loss, she also had cognitive impairment. And I remember the biggest frustration with that district is the district basically said she really does not deserve, and they didn't say it like this. They were smart enough to not say it like this to avoid a lawsuit. But basically, they were
Absolutely.
saying she is a second-class citizen and does not need or should not be entitled to the services of special education. And
Wow.
I mean, it was just really stunning to hear a special admin. That was in my first year. And I would later learn that that wouldn't be the first time or second time or even third time that I would be squaring off with different school districts about student rights
Yeah.
and doing a lot of coaching of parents. So, I would love to say all the outcomes turned out great, and many of them did, which was definitely a thrive moment.
Sure.
And then for the ones that didn't, they were moments of just really deep reflection, because you felt like a failure. and you would replay all the tapes in your head of what could I have done different? How could we have gone about this a better way? But then you had to, at some point, give yourself some grace and say, okay, we didn't win that one today, but
Yeah.
this battle's not over.
Get back up
We'll,
on the horse.
we'll keep fighting, and eventually we'll break through on that. And so I think that was a lot of that. You take solace in the fact that it's not over. As long as the kid's in that district, it's not over.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey. And I always feel that it's the valleys that make the mountaintop so sweet, right? So
Mhm.
it's those that just give us depth and experience and learning how to thrive through them, even though it's a loss. But getting up and putting one foot in front of the other and just keep showing up and doing our job every day, right? Just keep
Absolutely.
showing up and serving that student. You also spoke about how our daily actions directly impact the people we serve. How do you think teams and teachers or the whole IEP team can stay connected to the bigger mission amid everyday responsibilities and tasks?
Well, this is the nice thing is I think in most situations, most people, and if you're one of the TVIs who don't have a cohesive team, hang in there. Eventually, that will happen to you. But I think of across my many, many years of teaching and also being an administrator and principal and outreach director and fighting in other districts kind of thing. More often than not, there are teams of individuals. Yeah, the TVI, the speech path, the school psych, the physical education teacher. There are more often times cohesive teams that want what's best for the student. And then in that times, it's usually the battle of, which philosophy wins kind of moving forward. But it's not a battle of we're not serving this kid. You need that team approach, especially nowadays, and probably some of the TVIs listening to this have really excessively large caseloads.
Yeah.
And so you rely so much on that team, the para support, all the other specialists within the school and the
Yes.
classroom teacher to make sure that your objectives are being carried out because you can't be there every day. You can't be there to totally oversee that. So it takes a lot of trust on everybody's part, but I think more so on the itinerant teachers. You have to have so much trust in the system you've helped create that it's going to do right by the student. And that is a challenge. But when that comes together, it is such a wonderful experience. It's really from a educator's perspective, it's really uplifting and it's powerful to know that other people have your back.
I love that you said that. You really have to trust, right? In order to have trust, you have to give trust. So, if you could tell me for our listeners listening today, if you could leave this conversation with one strategy to help them thrive in their personal lives, their family lives, work lives, what would it be?
Hmm. Man, just one.
Jump out of the plane? No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
well, yeah, that's part of it. But I think so many TVIs are already doing that. I mean, they're like,
Sure.
yeah, no, duh, yeah, no, Sherlock. The one thing I can say is really take time to take care of yourself, and I'll make that even simpler. Appreciate what you have accomplished. And
Mm,
I'll give you a great example of that.
yeah.
I was at an event in Atlanta last night, and we were supposed to have I think, head of special education for Atlanta Public Schools and couldn't make it. So she sent a TBI,
Oh,
which
that's
was
awesome.
but this TBI came to this event. You had the mayor's office there, you had Senator Warnock's people there, you had
It was
another
important.
congressman's people there, you had some investors and I think this person just kind of came in, I mean, very confident of who she was, but kind of feeling like, what am I doing here? And so I was kind of
Sure.
doing meet and greet. And so we were talking, this was a focus on APH and what we're doing and the dot experience and all this great stuff that's going on, the Monarch and good maps and all this stuff. But as educators in this field will do, we immediately began to talk shop. And she had just told me about this huge success she had with a deafblind student of hers that she had been assigned this year. And the student is transitioning from middle school to high school. And the student has good resources, good support, so a great team. But the student has been so reliant on interpreters, interveners, and sometimes where that falls apart is out on mobility.
Mm,
And so she decided we have got to try to make you as independent as possible when you don't have that intervener
support.
walking
Yes.
beside you.
Definitely.
And so just with the focus on mobility. So she is piloting this whole program of using her iPhone. I don't know how they're going to do it, but right now what they're doing piloting is she is just speaking directions into the iPhone. And she told me it was a very elaborate setup, but basically the student had a chameleon around his neck. So cane in
Yes.
one hand, chameleon around his neck, and
Has a
he
braille
is
display. I love it.
and the braille display. And as she is dictating into the phone, and he is just reading directions and taking his cues from that and successfully navigating. And she was so fired up
Oh,
about, I mean, just to listen to her and the passion. And after she shared all that and she got excited, she almost was a little taken back by her excitement, perhaps a little embarrassed about here I am bragging about
no,
something
I
I've
love
done.
it.
And I'm
I
just
love
like,
the passion.
absolutely not. You need to pat yourself on the back because
Yeah,
this is huge. This is a
absolutely.
huge milestone for your student.
Hmm.
And
That's that child's world.
you are integral in moving this student to a whole nother level of independence using technology. And,
Yeah.
you were the one who was the catalyst to help that student reach that level of independence. So take a bow. And TVIs do that kind of stuff on a weekly basis, if not daily basis. Or sometimes those wins are long coming. We've all had that student that you're working with for months and months and months and months. And finally, they do that thing. They are able to run through that script for those kids who use a lot of scripts, or they're able
Beautiful.
to open that file or get independently from the classroom to the lunchroom, or they're able to interact socially with a fellow student. So I guess that's the thing is take time to recognize your wins, celebrate your student, but also celebrate yourself because you had a big, big part in helping that student achieve a whole nother level of independence.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Meador. Your keynote, and your message, it's just a reminder for all of us to truly thrive and to find ways to thrive in the face of challenges. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Switching gears. All right. We're excited to hear from Paul Schroeder, APH's Vice President of Government and Community Affairs. Paul has dedicated his career to advancing disability policy and expanding access to education and technology for people who are blind or low vision. He has played key roles in strengthening major legislation, including the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Communications and Video Accessibility Act. Paul, I am so grateful and humbled that you are joining us today.
Well, Heather, I am thrilled to be here. And I just have to say, dovetailing off Craig's story about the TVI that he met last night in Atlanta, if only there was an organization that could make interesting products like that, that maybe could support navigation of the kind Steve was just talking. If only somebody existed that could do that kind of work for students who are blind or low vision or deafblind.
Yeah.
And of course, that is exactly why APH exists, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. Like I said earlier, I was not able to attend this meeting, and I was wondering if you could give our listeners a brief overview of your keynote at the APH annual meeting and the message that you were hoping the attendees would take away.
Well, as folks will know, this was, of course, back in October of 2025. And what I did was put together a panel, and it was very intentional that I invited the president of the Association for Education and Rehabilitation of the Blind and Visually Impaired, aka AER,
Sure.
and the president of the National Federation of the Blind to be on this panel together. In part, that was because these organizations haven't always worked together. They've sometimes, in fact, been at opposite sides of issues. And in part, it was to make sure that the audience, which is probably more familiar with education in AER than it is with NFB, understood that these two organizations both offer hope and an opportunity to make change, to address challenges. And one of the things I would very much like to see with educators is more communication with consumer groups like NFB. And of course, there's the American Council of the Blind as well. Because A, it makes them more powerful, but B, it really helps to have someone with that lived experience, if you don't have it yourself, available to kind of give you perspective.
Well, I love how you brought everybody together as a panel and bridged the gap. It is powerful when teams are working together. That's wonderful.
When I said it was back in October, I also want to say that, that was in the midst of the shutdown of the federal government that lasted, 42 days or something.
Yeah.
And it was in the midst of what had been 2 weeks. No, I think that day, maybe, I'm trying to think of the date here, that notices had gone to employees at the Department of Education that they were being riffed. In other words, they were being let go. Turned out later that those were pulled back because you can't do that during a shutdown, and those employees have remained. But nonetheless, the department had already been more or less cut in half in terms of its staffing levels earlier in the year. So we had these two organizations talking with me up on the stage about what do we do in this situation? And we were just seeing concerns piling up on concerns. And the latest one, as I said, was the loss of staff with the knowledge and the professional expertise in special education and rehabilitation.
Sure. Wow, that's so empowering. And we still have an uphill battle, I feel. And I'm sure you both can agree to that with where we want to see education move. I do appreciate, though, how you are such an advocate for change. And you've had a long and impactful career. Your career has spanned roles from APH to ERA to the AFB and various policy and advocacy positions. So, how do you feel that those experiences and working in those settings have helped shape your perspective on how technology and accessibility is going to improve or not improve for those that are blind or have low vision?
One of the privileges of being at this for a while, particularly at this moment, is to witness and, in my case, experience and get to use the technologies that have changed and become more accessible. Obviously, mainstream devices like the iPhone and Android devices that incorporated accessibility right into the device and have continued to be updated by those companies, to the specialized technology like the Chameleon. And I can't believe we've gone this long and not mentioned the Monarch that APH
Yes.
recently introduced.
Amazing.
It is. And so I've had a chance to, play a small part in moving some of this forward, but have a big joy in getting to use and experience this technology.
Yeah.
The other thing that over time you learn is, I forget what Mitt Romney said about being a raging conservative or a radical conservative or something. I'm a raging incrementalist because I know that change comes slow, and it's so frustrating for people who don't spend their time around policy, because you think, hey, this is a good idea. It seems to make sense to everybody and all the stakeholders. Why can't we just do it? Well, it is never that easy because there are a ton of competing ideas and competing things happening.
Sure.
I think we know that the special ed law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it hasn't been reauthorized in it'll be coming up on 22 years this year.
Wow.
And there's lots of reasons for that. What that means is that some things are stuck where they were in 2004. That was a good reauthorization. That got us things like textbook accessibility and the National Instructional Material Access Center that is housed at APH. And there were some other clarifications in that bill that were built on top of the prior reauthorization that got a much stronger Braille language. And so the reauthorizations matter, but when they take 20 plus years between reauthorizations in this case, there's a lot of things that are frozen. Interveners is probably something we'll talk a lot more about when we get around to reauthorizing. But what you learn if you're in this policy world for a long time is, it's as frustrating as it may make you, it is incremental, and that's the best you can expect.
I feel what you're saying is that 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. And I really love what you say that those that are not directly involved in policy, it looks like nothing's happening. But really, where you are on the forefronts, you are seeing incremental change slowly. Everything takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And I just think that even applies for our students. With our students, we're not seeing any progress. But then one day they make that progress. And we're just like, awesome. We get to see the daily incremental things. Whereas somebody on the outside might say that student hasn't grown at all. And you're like, oh no, you have no idea. Look at what he did today. I'm not in policy, but I love your perspective on you being in the trenches of making change.
Such a good perspective that you shared there, because it is so hard when you're involved in something day to day to recognize that improvements are happening. And sometimes it is one step back. One of the stories I love to tell and make fun of my wife a little bit, who's wonderful, is when the appeals court in Washington, D.C. struck down a rule that started video description back in 1999 and 2000. And they struck down the rule based on the fact that the Federal Communications Commission didn't have the power to do that in the court's belief or opinion. I came home and I said this to my wife, and she's like, aren't you tired of losing? And I'm like, well, no, as an advocate, I just expect that's going to happen more often than not.
Absolutely.
She hates when I tell that story. She's like, that's not what I meant.
Yeah. Like Craig said, just keep jumping out of that airplane, Paul. Just keep jumping out of it.
Yeah, you just got to keep adding out. We got that small provision in place in 2010, and now streaming services, more programs that are required to have video description on television. And of course, it's almost ubiquitous in movies. And wow, that is something to be really thrilled about.
So what do you see right now as the biggest ongoing policy challenge or opportunity for improving independence for people with vision impairments?
Well, the glib side of me, probably no members of Congress are listening. The biggest challenge is Congress, remembering that it has authority granted to it in the Constitution that it really should stand up for, and agree or disagree with the policies of the current administration. The founders and framers were right in setting up this balance, this triangular balance among three branches. And, in their minds, Congress was the most important because it was the closest to the people. And so it disappoints me that I see a Congress that really isn't taking over its authority around funding and pushing back on some things that really should be up to Congress. And we'll see how that transpires. In terms of policy challenges, there's still some areas that we have not solved. And employment is one. And I don't just mean the number or percentage of people who are employed. That's an issue. And it's one we could debate about how you define and determine that. What I do mean is that there are systems that are critical in the employment context. Big enterprise software systems, for example, lots of specific kinds of technologies that are not easily accommodated or may not be accommodated at all. And so it creates disincentives for blind people to be hired and to have a fair shot at being able to do the duties of a job. And so I think that's one piece. The web continues to be both a wonderful giver of opportunity and a frustration where accessibility comes apart and where there is so much reliance on visual cues and material still. And I maintain that I think the first thing that that artificial intelligence is going to do is to create actually more visual graphs and charts and ways to depict things. We should pause and say, in the midst of all of the challenges, APH is very fortunate to have federal funding, and we have since 1879, and we have bipartisan support. I was being a little cheeky about Congress, but I will say we have great friends and we have great support there. And in the midst of all of these challenges, including the fact that our funding has not increased in the last 3 years, we've been able to launch Monarch. We've been able to put it in the hands of hundreds of students, and we're over 1,000 all told. And I believe that's going to start tipping the balance. And I also believe it's going to encourage more people to want to learn Braille and to use Braille effectively. But it's also going to do a ton of other things, including making classroom teacher created content more gettable for blind students.
And here's a little capture for CATT Northwest, but there is going to be a lot of training involved in teaching these teachers how to use the Monarch so that our students will have more access. So I love what CATT Northwest does. That's hats off to Ting and Leslie and Eli, who are in the trenches, actually like teaching those that are doing the work and training the trainer.
What's wonderful about those three is how different in some ways they all are from each other. And yet it's such a great team. And I've known Ting for a long time. I remember when she was a doc student. And I recently, last year, met Leslie and Eli. And it's such a great group. You all are really very lucky to have such a team, and I'm proud that APH can play a part in helping to make that happen. And
Grateful.
I just love when I communicate with Ting and we bat ideas back and forth, and she very kindly tells me when I'm wrong. She never puts it that way.
I feel privileged to be a part of it.
Heather, if I could just make one point about maybe the thriving question.
Yes, absolutely.
Probably the biggest message that I would share with teachers and really anybody is to try to eliminate the noise when you can. There is a lot of noise around what might be happening in Washington. And again, I'm not making a political statement. It's simply true. There's a lot of noise increasingly at the local level. People are concerned about what's happening in schools, and the ones with the concerns are typically the ones with the loud voices. And it's impossible to eliminate the noise or to ignore the noise entirely, but as much as you can, try to ignore it, because regardless of what happens to the Department of Education or what happens around book bans, things will change, things will morph. But what doesn't change is the relationship of a teacher and a student. And that is one of the most powerful relationships there is. And I would also say that I worry a lot about what I hear about young people in terms of difficulties with connectivity to people, not to technology, but the need for young people to have honest human connections. And I think it maybe gets overstated sometimes in the media, but it does seem like it is a real problem. And so the other thing I would say is just remember, as much as you can, try to encourage, push your students to have those connections with their peers, and then get out of the way when they do.
Oh, I love that. That is perfect. Again, I am so grateful that you guys are both here. I learned so much from both of you today. Thank you for sharing your insights and your leadership. We're all so grateful for the work that both of you and the entire APH community, all of the employees, the researchers, the innovators, the creators, the testers, what everybody is doing to advance accessibility and independence and opportunity. To our listeners, you're a vital part of this community, and we're grateful you're here. So don't forget to subscribe to the CATT Cast so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone who could use a little tech and teaching inspiration.
The CATT program is funded by a federal appropriation and works in partnership with the American Printing House for the Blind and Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind. Logos: APH, AIDB, and WSSB.